caught up in the wrong things as coaches. And I think now more than ever, being invested in the kids that you coach and understanding before you coach them that it's just different. And they're going through things that we didn't even go through. Maybe we did, but I don't think we did. I think times were a little bit simpler. Number one, we didn't have, well, I didn't, you guys may have. I'm not that old, but I didn't have one of these until really I started coaching. So I see my kids, I have 2 kids, I just see the difference. But for the first time in my coaching career, we dealt with the most mental health issues, the most anxiety. So I was more aware of that, and I paid more attention to it. And I really spent this first year, we had some success. We didn't make it to Omaha, or I wouldn't be here, so I wish I wasn't here. I wish we were out there, but we had a really young team. The NCAA allowed us to keep as many players as we wanted, which we never were allowed to do, which I thought was kind of neat. But we had a lot of kids. When I say a young team, we played a lot of true freshmen. And these kids, even more than anybody else, they missed their senior year in high school, and they missed their summers for the most part, not all of it, but for the most part. And then I thought back, I'm finally, basically, the way it worked for me was Coach Fox retired. I kind of had an idea he was going to, but then the next day we were on the field practicing. And we started class the next day. And then basically the season just ended. So I'm just now kind of coming up. I told my wife it feels like now I can think a little bit because you're just managing everything. You're managing your team. You're managing situations. And reflecting back, the things that I'll share with you the most that I think are important, because you guys, I mean, I get coaching. I understand it. I've been doing it a long time. And I'm probably one of the most competitive people around. So when the game starts, to me, it always changes. Like, all I care about is winning the game. And hopefully when the game starts, most competitors, that's a lost thing in today. It's a lot. No, I didn't get a trophy when we finished 6th when I was younger, and I don't like that side of it. But I do know that kids now, they need us, they need you more than they ever have. And they're long days in coaching. They're challenges in coaching. As you get older and you have a family, there's other things on our plates. But I remind myself, being a college athlete, going back, those kids, they don't care about that. They care about where they are right now, what's going on in their life. We've all been there. We've been 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, very self-consumed. That's just how you are. But I firmly believe now more than ever, these kids need to be loved. And sometimes there is tough love. Discipline, that's part of tough love. And we have that, and you guys are going to discipline your athletes. But I figured out after coaching a long time and, being at a lower level and then to the pinnacle, I guess, we've been fortunate. We've been to Omaha quite a few years. I've coached in 2 national championships. We lost them both. But I have been in the dugout in the pinnacle of baseball, and I've been around some great coaches. I mean, that's the neatest thing about UNC. The Anson Dorrances, the field hockey teams, the lacrosse teams, the basketball teams, just national champions everywhere. So I'm constantly trying to learn. But what I have learned is that kids recognize whether or not you really care about them. And you can't fool them. And what happens is, or at least what happened with me, is you first start coaching for all the right reasons. You love being around the kids. You love having an impact, which is why we all should coach. That's why you coach. A coach truly can, as it's been said, you can change. I look back at all my coaches, and now I realize I either had an unbelievable coach or an awful coach. There was usually no in between, especially when it came to the influence that they had on my life. Looking back to, I played 3 sports. I didn't even love baseball. That was my last love, but it was what I was best at, so that ended up taking over. But I remember all my coaches, just like I remember a lot of my teachers. But I remember the ones that generally cared the most about my life usually had the biggest impact on me as a player. Because none of us are perfect. Nobody's perfect with the X's and O's. Nobody's going to, players and parents these days think you are going to make their kid great. You're just not. the kids got to make themselves great. You're just trying to guide them along the way. But that is, the one thing that I thought the message I would say is you have to generally love your players, and the only way to do that is to figure out who they are individually. And that can be a challenge sometimes because some of them are a pain to coach, even at our level. Some are really, but the older I get, the more gratifying it is to help a kid like that than the ones that are so easy to coach. Because I remind our staff every day, like, these kids all have different backgrounds. They're all dealing with different things that we have no idea. And a great example of that is 2 years ago, I'm just walking around our infield, talking to players, which I like to do some days when we're just doing fundamental stuff at practice where it's more repetition. And our shortstop, Ike Freeman, one of my favorite players I've ever coached. North Carolina kid, wasn't very good when he got to UNC, but really tough. Probably hit about 130, only about 40 at-bats his freshman year, but ended up being an All-American for us. Great player. He's playing professional baseball now. But Ike was always moody. I'm talking like moody. And I was just talking to him one day, how your parent, and that's the plus of being a recruit, you get to know families. And he said, yeah, my mom's not doing great. And I was like, that kind of brought up an antenna. I'm like, well, I didn't know anything was wrong with his mom. But he went on to tell me that his mom, at the age of 52, was diagnosed with severe dementia. And I just thought to myself, well, this makes sense. Here's a kid that's probably upset often because it's a close family. And it made me realize, okay, it's my job to try to figure that out. So it's even more of a challenge for you guys. I have a ton of respect for people that coach kids between the age of 15, 14, and 18. Because it's even more, at North Carolina, at that level, eventually, if a kid's not completely vested, completely bought in, there comes a time where that kid's going to be replaced with a more elite athlete. The neatest thing about what you guys do is you have even more of an impact, honestly, probably, than we do, because that age is just so important. And I'm seeing it. Saw it at my house. I see it in my 16-year-old. That's getting ready to be 17. Just the changes she's had. And she's a volleyball player. She travels now all over the country playing, which I've enjoyed, but I just observe all the coaches, and I see the same thing in volleyball that I see in travel baseball. I had a nephew that was a really good football player. I went to all of his games at Lee County. He went on to play at App State. He went to play at East Carolina. I saw the same thing. You either have a good coach or you have a terrible coach. And you can really tell the ones that want these kids to succeed. So I encourage you to try to get to know your kids, love them, and sometimes there is such thing as tough love. And the other thing I thought I'd share with you, I do think one thing that is lost is accountability and discipline. I think too many people and coaches today, it's okay to be close with your athletes, and you need to get to know them, but they have to be held accountable. And if you want to have a successful team and your best players, 1 minute late to every team meeting, and you let that best player start over and over and over, you'll lose your team. You'll completely lose your team. And I learned that from the best. My coach was Coach Fox, played for him, and I was one of those players. So I don't want to bore you with my history, but I grew up in Sanford, North Carolina, and I went off to a junior college. All I cared about was sports, didn't care about school, but I was one of those players that was hard to coach. And luckily, I went to play for Mike Fox, who I learned so much. Not that my parents did a great job raising me, but there comes a time that you don't know anything as a parent, right? You've all been there. Like, I don't think Hannah even listens to me about recruiting, and I've been recruiting 25 years. I don't think she knows what I'm talking about. So I'm quiet, and they have to learn on their own. But I tell you what, it's you really start figuring out why you coach the more you coach. And I constantly remind our staff and myself, why do you coach? Because if you happen to have success and you happen to win more games, then all of a sudden we can get caught up into that part of it. And I really believe, I've read a ton of books about coaching, motivation, all that good stuff. I read a book a while back from the former 49ers head coach, called Winning Takes Care of Itself. It's one of the better books I've read. There are a lot of great books. And I firmly believe that. If you do everything. Now, and the hard part for high school is you have what you have. Right? You can't really recruit, can you? Maybe you can, but it's illegal. I guess. If you move, I guess, and get a house. Yeah, I get it. I understand. And I understand that part of it, but you also kind of have what you have, and it's up to you. We can be the same way. We recruit our players, and some years the batch is unbelievable, and some years you're like, man, I needed to do a better job. I didn't do a good enough job. But you still have what you have, and you get to decide how you coach that team, and you get to create the story for that team. And that's one of my things that I do. I was fortunate because Coach Fox gave me a lot of responsibility starting about 10 years ago. He was at a place in his career where I was doing a lot of things that the normal assistant didn't do that really helped me when I became a head coach. But what I learned my first year, you learn a ton. Everybody told me you're going to learn the most your first year. What I learned is focus on your kids. Focus on your kids. And then the rest will take care of itself. In his first year, first school, my advice to you would be make every kid that plays for you say that was an unbelievable experience. And believe it or not, even more in high school, it's not, some years you may have an unbelievable crop, some years you may not, but the kids are going to have either a good experience or a bad experience. And you set the tone every day. It's just the way it is. I walk out there every day for practice. I walk in a coaching meeting. If you're the leader of your program, and I walk in and I have a lot of people working under me, but my assistant coaches, they're younger, they played for us, they have younger kids, I set the tone for that day. And sometimes that can be hard, right? You got 5 hours of sleep, something going on at the house, you have all that stuff. You have to remind yourself when you are in charge of a team and you're coaching, as soon as you walk in there, your body language, your energy, your organizational skills, your attitude more than anything, it's going to be contagious. It's just going to, one way or the other. And I'm a firm believer in that. And you can fake it, and you can make yourself all of a sudden have the best attitude. And you can fake it the whole time and then go home and just fall down, because that happens sometimes.
Coach Forbes, I'm gonna kind of hold you real quick because I gotta step out in the gym and I'm gonna go start talking to them.
Absolutely.
Guys. One of the reasons I wanted, and not to wish that you weren't in Omaha, but I really needed you here, and I really appreciate.
I really wish I wasn't.
I know, and I really appreciate him coming in here under these circumstances, kind of short notice, and hopping in and talking with us. And the reason is I've heard you talk before, and he's very genuine. If you guys listen to his words, it's nothing different than what we think a lot of times, and that's why I like listening to you a lot. It just means a lot to us, so thank you. So I'm gonna leave you one of them. We got a lot of people working real hard right now, and I think it's a perfect time for you to talk to them. And we'll let some questions, if anybody has any questions, do that, and then Heather will lead us down to the gym after you guys are all done. So I'm going to head down there. I just wanted to personally thank Coach Forbes. Thank you, sir.
My little one will be over here eventually, so that'll be cool to be over here. And I want to answer any questions. I don't want to keep talking, but I was one of those coaches, and that's what I'll share with you at one point. Like, I was one of those coaches that had a lot of success, and I thought I went about things the wrong way, and it bit me. And you can't get that. Now, I don't think it bit me with the players, because I always loved the players, but you're chasing the wrong thing. You're chasing the next job. You're chasing the national championship. You're chasing, I want my name in this coaching thing, this, that, and the other. And then if you're not careful, all of a sudden you look and you got a 16-year-old and you miss 4 years, 5 years. And that's a balance as a coach. And what helped me is, number one, my faith helped me tremendously, but also just realizing the same thing when I go home. They don't care. I mean, they do as they get older. My wife's competitive, so maybe she cares, but they don't care. Like, they want me to be a dad, they want me to be at home, and that's a tough balance, isn't it, as a coach? Because you win, you lose, and when you lose, man, like, I'm a terrible loser. I've been a terrible loser since I was a kid, my dad told me. Like, I was that kid. I didn't do it at the field because he'd have whipped my tail, but as soon as I walked in the door, if we lost, I started crying. And he was like, you can't cry every time you lose. And even now, I have trouble sleeping, but that's part of coaching. And I learned after our 2013 season, I want you to think about this for a second. We were 59-12. We were number one in the country the entire year, and we didn't lose 2 games in a row the whole year. We got knocked out in Omaha by UCLA. But I don't like, that year was like the most stressful year for me at the time I had. And I was like, well, wait a second. If it's stressful being 59-12, why am I coaching? I'm missing the whole point of why I'm coaching. So and then we had a couple down years for us. We weren't, like this year, in my opinion, wasn't a good year for us. We made the postseason. Some people would be happy with that, but those years made me better and made me realize, okay, now when we get back to that point, I'm not going to let it be about that. And it's amazing how much your outlook, if you just focus on the kids and reminding yourself constantly that your words are unbelievably powerful and you can't take them back, and we're all guilty of it. I've said things to players that I was like, man, I've had to be a man and apologize for them. But the key is you got to mature, you got to grow up, you got to understand that now more than ever, these kids need us and they need you. They need that leadership, they need to be loved on, they need the discipline, and you got to find the line in between. And when you have an opportunity like this, you're coming off a whole year where these kids didn't have any interaction with each other. You know, they need to enjoy sports. They need to look forward to being on, because sometimes I remind myself the release is you guys. That's their release from, because these kids put more pressure on themselves than we ever did. At least I think. I mean, I see it in my house. Maybe it's because I didn't really care if I made a C or an A. But, you know, the applications, the Instagrams, the Twitter, whatever it is, you see it all the time, right? Y'all see it. And you have to be aware of it, but then you want their release to be on the field. But their release isn't going to be on the field if every time they come home and they feel absolutely beat down, mentally. I didn't say physically, right? Effort's non-negotiable at UNC. It's non-negotiable. If you don't give effort, you're never going to play. You're going to be in my doghouse from the day you walk on campus. It's not hard to hustle. But if I'm constantly negative, if I'm constantly yelling at kids, you're going to lose them. And you'll lose them fast. So I encourage you to enjoy it. Enjoy being around the kids, but remind yourself every single day your influence is really powerful. And as crazy as that sounds, I think your influence right now is more important than college coaches' influence. Because I saw a stat the other day of how many athletes play Little League, then they play middle school, then they play high school, and then all of a sudden it just goes from like here to right there. Because that's how hard it is to play in college, and then it goes right there to play professionally. So if y'all have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I'm excited to follow because obviously we moved. You know, my older daughter is at the old, I guess it's called North, yeah. But anyway, you know, we're not going anywhere. We don't plan on it. So my younger daughter will be here, I believe, is what my wife told me. So that's exciting, and y'all have a great opportunity. Y'all have any questions at all? Yes, sir.
Yeah. So with our situation here, we'll have freshmen, a lot of freshmen the first year, then a little bit of sophomores. We'll be adding a grade each year. So for us coaches, one thing we're going to have to navigate is you're going to have freshmen starting in varsity sports and in varsity positions who in a few years may not be still in that role. And with you in the situation you're in, you may have a freshman third baseman who plays, and then you bring in a new freshman third baseman, and he's taking his spot and is starting. So what advice would you give for us to manage that situation and not just bring that player up, but to communicate and mentor with those players who are getting older, but are facing a little bit of competition from the younger classes? Like, how as a team manager mentor and advocate for these players can we communicate and support those players who may be facing that competition?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have it all the time, obviously. And every coach has a different philosophy. So your philosophy is yours, mine's mine. And at UNC, the best players are going to play. It doesn't matter if you've been here 1 year, 2 years. Doesn't matter if you were a freshman All-American. You come back, there's a better shortstop. That to me is important. That kids understand. And in high school it can be different. Coaches can have different things. Because at the end of the day, and you're welcome to ask me a question about parents because I love answering that one. But you guys see it every day. Right? You see the practice, who deserves to play, who's loafing. But, if it's equal and these kids are working as hard as they can, but then a younger player's just better, I've always played that player, and I always will. And at North Carolina, we make it really clear right away that it's all about the team. Before we start anything, like, look, you're coming to the wrong place. If it's all about you developing individually, getting drafted, and signing for $2 million. So my advice would be making it clear to your team, like, hey, we're a team, so every decision we make is going to be about the team. And sometimes you may not like that decision, and it may mean you might move from tight end to middle linebacker. But that helps our team succeed, and then getting everybody to understand how important it is to believe in their role, and even though they may not love their role, that it's non-negotiable, and the way we do things, they have to buy into it, unless they just want to sit on the side and watch everybody play. It's always a challenge when that happens. And probably also in high school, I'm sure parents are a challenge, but that's why I don't know if I could coach in high school. Maybe, but. Yes, ma'am.
I'd love to hear your story about dealing with parents, because I know I already have some that I know we're going to deal with. But one of the more important questions that I have is, as coaches, how do we help our kids to be recruited? What tips do you have? And I know there's a lot of strategies. For example, on social media, perhaps a coach starts following you, then you follow them back. What advice can we give to our players as far as increasing their recruitment chances? And as coaches, what are things that we can do to help promote our children? For example, making sure that game film is available, making sure stats is available. So just from both of those perspectives, can you give us some advice?
I'll answer the recruiting one first. Obviously, the better a player gets, all of a sudden, hopefully they're going to get noticed. But that's not always the case. This is a smaller town. I grew up in a smaller town. Sometimes you have to really help. And the more, I'm going to listen when a coach calls me. Just so you guys know, if a high school baseball coach calls me and gets a hold of me directly, I'm more apt to listen to that high school coach. We're old school in that standpoint. Like, we do a lot of background because we didn't for a couple of years that we didn't, and we started committing all these kids really early. When that started, we got burnt. And we had talented players that were not good locker room guys. That hurt our culture for like 2 or 3 years. So we went back. If I recruit a kid, I'm going to call his high school coach before I call his travel ball coach. Because his travel ball coach is going to promote his travel team because he wants to put on his website that kid committed. We all know that. But you helping that whatever sport it is, I do think, well, obviously during COVID, video was very valuable. But it doesn't hurt to get an email from the coach, say, hey, coach, I just want to let you know I have this player that I think is really talented. Great student, even better person, hard worker. I think it might be somebody you want to put on your radar, get at your camp, or maybe even come see. And always put your cell phone down. That's extra work, right, for coaches, and that's just part of what y'all do. I think you have to be leery of the recruiting services. I think some of them are good. I just don't know that enough about them. I know that if I get, 1 million emails and they're from a generic recruiting service compared to an email from a coach that coaches in high school at a North Carolina high school where we want to get the best players at North Carolina, I'm going to pay attention to that one before I pay attention to whatever the recruiting service is. But I also understand for my nephew being recruited in football, and I've got a lot of, Dre Bly and I are really good friends, so he tells me, obviously it's a totally different deal. In football, the video, the huddle, I'm seeing that in volleyball and other sports. But I think the more communication you can have and the more you can help that athlete understand the importance of, hey, you've got some ability and you might get recruited, but you also have to do your part. You have to respond to the email if the coach emails you, and eventually you want to help and then let the athlete do that part. The athletes need to know too that social media is a ticking time bomb. I looked before I came to talk to you guys, we had a big meeting about in-state recruiting. We've had 7 players in the last 3 years that we've dropped because of social media posts, which is crazy to me. Not that they were bad kids, but my hands were tied. And even if they weren't tied, I would have let them go. Because I'm thinking to myself, okay, you want to be treated like an adult when you get here, right? That's what all these kids want, and then you're going to tweet this. I just don't think that's going to work here. They're human beings, they got to learn from it. But I think remind your athletes, like, that's a reflection. We have a social media company that comes in and meets with our freshmen. We start summer school in 2 weeks. The second day, they'll meet with our freshmen. They'll pull up every flag, tweet, or I don't know what else is out there. What do they use? Instagram. Whatever. They'll pull it up if it's anything. If it's borderline. Anything that's borderline. And we all know there's a lot of that. And that kid, you see the kid just kind of going down in their seat like, I can't believe I said that when I was 13, 14, 15. And it's good for our kids to see that. But I think the more you can help, I remember, like you said, you remember your coaches, and I had a great high school. I was fortunate to have a really good high school coach. And, I wasn't a good student, but he went out of his way to help me find a place. Parents, for me, that was pretty short. It's a little harder for y'all. I don't really deal with them. I talk to parents if it's something that academically, emotionally, physically, injuries, those type of things. I make it clear to our players in the first team meeting that playing time, I'm not going to talk to your parents about playing time. So if a parent calls me about playing time, the kid knows they're supposed to tell their parent, if you call me about playing time, your playing time's going down. If you want to talk to me about playing time, we have an open door policy at UNC. You can call me. I'm not going to talk to you seriously over the phone because I believe in, and I encourage you, be careful what you text these days or having a conversation over text. It's no good. And every time you meet with a player, try to have one of your assistant coaches with you. And you got to understand, everything you're saying could be recorded. As crazy as that sounds, not that hopefully we're saying things that are okay to be recorded, but when I first started coaching, they weren't. I said some things that if they were recorded, they would I probably wouldn't be standing in front of you right now. But I think parents now, more than ever, and I understand, like we love our own kids. But they have a lens. If you have kids like I just refuse to do it, and I'm probably too hard on my 2 daughters because I'm not doing that. They're not coming home and telling me it's the coach's fault. I don't care how bad the coach is or how negative the coach is. It's not going to happen in the Forbes household, but it does happen in most households. And you just need to know that going into it, that every kid you coach, in their parents' eyes, that's Emmitt Smith as a running back. That's who I always thought was the best running back when I was coming along. That's Mike Trout right now in baseball. He's the best volleyball player, track, whatever. That's what they think. So you have to kind of manage that. But you have to make it clear that, you just don't want to get into that playing time issue. And to me, if I was ever, and I would love to, the rat race that I'm doing now, like I'm definitely not going to be doing that when I'm 65. And I would love to give back to my community and help one day wherever I'm living in high school, because I think sometimes the kids need you because their parents are crazy. Seriously, they just. It's the sports is live and die and live through their kid, which just blows me away. And there are times where I wanted to, and I have a couple times, because I've been coaching long enough, where I've actually called a couple parents and said, look, can you just ease up? And they may be thinking, well, you raise your kid how you want to, and that's fine if they want to think that, but I'm seeing the kid. And I know what they're calling their kid about. They're not asking them how school was today, how your grades. They're saying, how was practice? Did you go, how many hits did you get? Do you think you're going to play? Think about that as a kid. That's a tough conversation. So my advice on parents is they need to be part of your program, but playing time is just not a discussion. Since I'm being recorded, I won't say what else. You just have to be smart. You want to be smart and do the best you can in that situation and focus on the players. And I know it's really difficult for y'all even more than it is for us. Any more questions?
Well, I got a question about culture building. Like, I guess I've been a part of a lot of teams, but usually, like the best cultures team culture I've been a part of is usually like when the player with the most influence in the locker room was like a good guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
is that sort of the way you look at it too, or do you think a coach can be able to control the locker room even though he might not control like the best player or the most vocal player on the team?
Well, I do think that the greatest teams you have are player-led. That's for sure. But you're still the leader of the program, so you decide what your culture is going to be. And then you decide what you allow. Because the old saying, what you allow is what you encourage. Our guys know right off the bat, this is our culture, these are the expectations, these are our standards. We're going to have a lot of fun, but if you can't do these things, you're going to have a hard time here. Every program's different, so you can decide that. Like, we play against teams that, they're Bush League as they come. They celebrate every home run they hit. They've got hair down to here. They've got beards down to here, which, they might win the national championship. That's just their culture. I think whatever you decide it is, you have to instill it. But I do think I think coaching matters. A lot of people say, oh, they just didn't have enough good players. Well, we all know some years you're going to have more players than others. And as a matter of fact, I think the better players you have, that year's easier. You get more gratification. Honestly, I probably had more gratification out of this season, not because it was my first year as a head coach, because we lost our Saturday starter to Tommy John, which is a season-ending surgery. We lost our Sunday starter to Tommy John, season-ending surgery. We had COVID. We lost our closer. We lost our leadoff hitter for 14 games because one tested positive for COVID. The other one who already had COVID, they still traced them. So we're going to Florida State. We're going to Pitt without two of our best players. So, like, at the end of the season, you have to, the fans don't look at it that way because they only look at, did you win a national championship at the end of the day? But you kind of know as a coach what you had. Like that 2013 team that we had with 59 wins, we didn't do a lot. We just kind of managed those guys. They were older, and that's when it's even more fun to really help them figure out the culture. And I think if you instill that culture, and it can be hard sometimes, because this is a great example I'll give you about culture. We were playing Duke. I was sitting at the pregame meal, found out we lost. This was after we lost Friday to Duke, weekend series. We lost Friday. I found out that day that we weren't going to have our leadoff hitter and our closer, so we already lost. I was like, oh man, we're at home. We need to win this series really bad. And we're getting ready to eat our pregame meal at 9 o'clock, and our center fielder's not there. I mean, this guy's a stud. Like a stud, and he's just not there. So then where are all the eyes going? They're going to me. So I had a choice. Well, do I play him? Because I want to play him. Like my competitive side, like you all want to do, you want to play him. But then I said, well, I went back to saying, well, what made us so successful all these years? There's no way in HELL Mike Fox is playing this guy. So don't give in. Stay with your principles. Didn't play him. He was a great kid, had a great attitude, stayed in the dugout, and we found a way to win. But I had to live with the fact that I had to think that our culture and moving forward was more important. And the same thing happens, unfortunately, if you ever have a tough player, sometimes it's addition by subtraction, which stinks. But if you get that culture right, your chances of being successful are just better, even if you're a, quote, star player. Now, if you have a star player and he's the guy, and he's the leader, and he's bought in, and he's talented, then you hit gold. And we've had some of those. I coached the best college player to ever play, Dustin Ackley, in college. He had like 115 hits every year. He hit 410 every year. One of the best leaders I've ever coached. And there was no coincidence that we were so good during those times, but we've also had first-round picks that weren't. so we came up a little bit short. They were more concerned about their pro career than they were the team, and that's just unfortunate sometimes. But the culture, you get to decide whatever you decide that is, whatever that team, but you have to stay with it. You can't preach positivity, attitude, short memory, and then you're the example. I've learned that. Like I am the example. I have to fake it hard sometimes because you lose 3 or 4 games in a row. NC State comes to Chapel Hill this year and they just whip our tail at our park 3 games. It's hard to walk out there and practice Monday and not, and to not have a good, but you just have to practice what you preach. And I think if you follow and you research the best, people try to say, well, this coach, he's got all this at his fingertips. That coach probably didn't always. He instilled that culture. And that's why, to me personally, and you guys may disagree, because I love sports, but if you really pay attention to Alabama, if you really pay attention to them, their culture, like you watch them play, you watch their hustle, you watch how they carry themselves, you watch their interviews, you watch when they score a touchdown, hand the football to the official. That has been so instilled in those guys. And Nick Saban's able to still get the best players in the country to come there. A lot of people say they pay them, but they pay them everywhere, supposedly. But I can tell you that culture, it's just clear compared. And it's the same thing in baseball. You have a team that does all those things that aren't good, and they have some success, and then they just crash and burn. So I firmly believe that culture matters, and that the head coach, the assistant coaches, and that's another thing. You gotta work together. You have to work together. And if you're the head coach, you have to sit down with your assistant coaches, and y'all have to be on the same page, because there's nothing better than loyalty. If you're an assistant coach in here, I was one a long time, and I take a lot of pride in looking you in the eye and telling you I didn't agree with what Mike Fox did every single time, but I would never, ever say that to a player, a parent, anybody outside, maybe my wife. And she didn't want to hear it anyway, probably. But those are very important.
What's the top 3 pieces of advice you'd give to this coaching staff here for this coming year?
Well, I think the first one would be love your kids. I think they need it. Learn to listen and love your kids. That would be go together. None of us are by nature are good listeners. You have to work at it. And kids need you to listen. Number 2, I would say, lead by example, because that's just the way it goes. Words don't mean anything if you don't back them up. Just off the top of my head, that would be the second thing. And then number 3 is I really believe in positivity. And if you're not a positive person by nature, you can turn into one. I've seen it happen. And you being positive on a daily basis with a good attitude, it'll start being contagious. I say those 3 things. I think if you're not, I think the other's even more contagious. Like I can't do it. I'll be the first to tell you, I can't be around negative, draining. I'm just not going to do it. And our coaches know that, our players know that, and they know when they step between those white lines, they know what they're going to get. They know that as their leader, I'm not perfect, but they know we're going to get after it. Like practice matters. We're not going through the motions. We're going to get better. But they also know how important it is for me to see them being positive, learning to flush things really fast, because you're going to make a mistake. You're going to fumble a football. You're just going to make a mistake. And those athletes that can learn to move past it really fast, they end up being elite. And I think coaches that can move past, we've all been guilty, right? If in baseball, we don't turn a double play in the first, if I'm still talking about in the 7th, I'm not practicing what I preach. So I think those 3 things would be 3 of the most, with as corny as it sounds, and we talk about it as a team all the time, like one of the things I hated about COVID the most was, like, we believe in hugs. I know that sounds crazy, but we want to hug each other. We want to tell each other we love each other, even when we're mad at each other. And that was hard in COVID, and these kids felt it. Like we had separate buses, we couldn't meet at the same time. I think these kids are walking in now needing you more than they've ever have. They need athletics, and they need to have fun playing athletics. It needs to be a release from all the other crap that they've had to, all the fear that they've had to deal with that has been put on them that they don't deserve. I know y'all have other stuff to do. Good?
Awesome. Thank you very much.